Welcome to our Hollywood interview series. My name is Giovanna Salas, and today we have a very interesting guest with us. His name is Alex Simon. He's a screenwriter, a journalist, and has interviewed over 600 people with some of the biggest names in Hollywood. And I have the honor and opportunity to have him today with us. I'm very happy to have you. You have a lot of experience. How long have you been a journalist and a screenwriter?
I've been a screenwriter since 1990 when I graduated from USC, and I've been a journalist since around 1996.
What does it feel to have your movie made?
Well, it's an amazing feeling to hear to hear actors speak your words. I remember the first film of mine that where I was able to visit the set was when I worked for a producer named Roger Corman, who's a legendary figure in Hollywood. And I visited the set, and Roddy McDowall was among the people in the cast. And Roddy McDowall was a legendary golden age of Hollywood actor. He started out as a child actor in the 40s and then matured into a terrific character actor. And I literally walked on to this set at Rogers Studio in Venice, California, and I heard Roddy McDowall, who I'd grown up seeing in all these great movies like Planet of the Apes and many others, speaking my words that I'd just written, less than a week earlier. So it was a remarkable feeling. It was kind of surreal almost.
I feel that is like the dream of every screenwriter. So how do you avoid the famous blocking, the block writers, the blocking writers?
Writer's block?
Yes, exactly.
I don't believe in writer's block. I think you just sit down and you do the work and the words come. It's simple as that. I've definitely had days where the juices aren't flowing and I simply don't write, but I never have really felt blocked per se before. It's important, if you want to make a living in this business, to not view yourself and your work with too much preciousness. You have to view yourself more as sort of a carpenter, a craftsman. And if you have a job to do and a deadline to meet, you sit down and you get it done.
Simple. Do you have any tips for the other screenwriters? They're trying to write a screenplay, and I can say that about myself as well. When I try to write, and what you do to keep the story moving forward?
Well, my standard speech I give to young people, if they ask me what my advice is about going into the business, it's if you can picture yourself doing anything else and being happy, I can't encourage you strongly enough to stay away from any of the 7 arts, including screenwriting or filmmaking. If you can be a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, any of those things, go do those things. My first day of film school at USC, the dean of the school sat us all down and said, "You're all here because you can't do anything else, because you have no choice." So I'd say first and foremost, you have to feel that you have no choice. It's like a calling. I think the only other people who really can relate to what people in the arts do are people who join the clergy, because it's not a choice for them. It's something that they have to do that comes from a deep place inside of them. So that's number one. Number two, if you're a writer, you write. Simple as that.
Yes.
Finish your screenplay. Get it down. It's better to have something that's imperfect down on paper or on your computer than having something that's just a dream up here.
And so I noticed that you have interviewed hundreds of people. Yeah. Do you have any favorite interview that you have made?
I did was probably with a director named John Frankenheimer, who was really the one person I interviewed who I got to be friends with. His most famous movie is probably the original Manchurian Candidate, which was made in 1962. And John was a remarkable guy. He was a Renaissance man. He was in addition to being an accomplished filmmaker, he was a gourmet chef who studied at the Cordon Bleu. He was a race car driver. He was heavily involved in politics in the 1960s with Robert Kennedy. And in fact, drove Robert Kennedy to the Ambassador Hotel the night that he was assassinated. So John lived many different lifetimes before he passed away at far too young of an age. Um, and was just an endlessly fascinating person. You could sit down with John and, you know, just, he would just entertain you with his stories that he would tell. He was a phenomenal raconteur, which made my job as an interviewer very easy, very easy. You ask him, what's your favorite color, John? And he would give you this incredible in-depth answer that would
He
touch
seems
all
to
these
have a
different.
lovely personality.
Yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing that. I was curious about that because when I read was like over 600 interviews, and I was
yeah.
like, it's amazing. One of
Oh,
the things, can you share with us about the interview, the Hollywood interview? This is a podcast. What is
yeah.
it about?
Well, originally the Hollywood Interview was a blog that's still up, the hollywoodinterview.com, that my buddy Terry Keefe and I started. Terry also wrote for Venice Magazine along with me, and it has all of our interviews, all of our greatest hits, basically, up on the website. And my friend Connell O'Herlihy, who is a podcast producer, approached me about a year ago to turn it into a podcast. So what we've done is we've taken a lot of my classic interviews and reproduced them with actors reading the celebrities part, and then I read my part. And we were in the process of putting some new content and interviews together when the COVID-19 lockdown started. So there's more new content to come, as well as more reproduced classic interviews.
I mean, I read some of your interviews, one that you did with Mel Gibson.
Oh yeah,
It's quite interesting. I mean, you have interview Nicolas Cage, Abdur. You have also interview Steven Spielberg. I mean, this.
I never interviewed Mr. Spielberg. I met him
Oh,
uh,
okay.
socially, including the picture you just showed. That was at the dedication of the new USC Film School in 2009. He's a very nice guy, very approachable, and we grew up in the same hometown in Phoenix, Arizona. So we both times I've met him, we kind of bonded over that, what it was like growing up in Phoenix, being a kid who was nuts about movies.
Well, yes, he's a very nice man and a great filmmaker. I love the Spy or the movie or the Bridge with the
Yeah,
yes.
very good.
That was a great movie.
It was.
Well, I would like to ask you a little bit about you. You are usually the person that does an interview to everyone, but I'm a little bit curious to know your background, where you're from.
Yeah, I was born in Lexington, Kentucky. My parents were both academics. My father was a university professor. My mother was a speech pathologist, and they were both involved in community theater. So I grew up being backstage in all these community theater productions with them. I think that's where I sort of got my taste of show business early. We moved to Phoenix, Arizona when I was in grade school, and that's where I primarily grew up. And then I went to USC Film School for college, and I've been in California since then.
What was first? It was journalism or the screenwriter?
Screenwriting. I took my first screenwriting class when I was 11 years old. My mother signed me up for an adult screenwriting class because all the other stuff that kids did in suburban Phoenix in the 70s, Little League and soccer and Boy Scouts and all that stuff, it just wasn't for me. And my parents didn't quite know what to do with me, so she signed me up for this adult screenwriting class, and everything just sort of clicked into place after that. So I wrote my first screenplay when I was 11 years old, and I just never stopped writing from then on out.
Will you encourage, for example, like young kids to, if they have that desire of writing a story, to for them to take a screenwriting class?
Absolutely. If you have that creative itch inside of you, you have to honor that, especially when you're young. As I said before, there's a difference between being creative when you're a young person, before you have to be self-supporting, and then really making that decision of whether you want to make the leap into doing it professionally. It's two different things. But yeah, anybody who's, I'd say, college age or younger, who wants to try to tackle screenwriting or any sort of creative endeavor, I would absolutely encourage them to do so.
And I would like to know, how do you spend your time during this lockdown that it has been quite a thing for everyone?
Well, I'm lucky. I got hired to write a miniseries TV pilot and show Bible for a producer friend. So I'm getting paid to be in lockdown, which is what writers are any for the under deadline. So being under lockdown isn't really a new thing for me, although it's never been quite this extreme. So I've been working on this script, which I actually hope to have it completed by the end of the weekend.
Though that's wonderful. Do you think you can give some advice to others that are in the lockdown and they are trying to work with their craft, but that we are going through a tremendous changes and emotion, learning new technology, like myself.
I would say do whatever you want to do. Don't feel pressured into doing anything, because if you put pressure on yourself, anything you try to produce in that frame of mind probably isn't going to be your best work. Um, if you want to dive into a pile of books that have been stacked up by your bed for months or years, I would say do that. If you want to watch a bunch of movies, I would say do that. If you want to sit down and write something, do that. But I mean, if there's any upside to what we're going through right now, it's that we have nothing but free time on our hands. And if you can use that free time productively, that's probably the most positive use of your time and energy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And going back to you to the Hollywood interview, how the audience can reach the channel.
Always streaming the episodes that we've had done. They're on every major streaming platform for podcasts. So it's very easy to find the Hollywood Interview podcast. Um, Currently, we have I think 6 episodes up. My producer is working on the second part of a two-part interview I did with a filmmaker who's a friend of mine named Danny Wolf, who did a terrific documentary on cult movies that is going to be on Showtime, I think the next month or two. So it's very easy to find, as is our website, thehollywoodinterview.com.
The Hollywood interview.com. I read a couple. That's the one that I read with Mel Gibson. I was very interested, and I think that I'm going to become a fan.
Oh,
Reading. This is like a funny question, but if you was in a deserted island, what would you take with you?
Well, definitely a laptop computer with a limitless battery life, and hopefully a good internet connection. That way, I could read, I could write, I could watch movies, um, and I could also watch some YouTube videos on how to stay in shape while I'm stuck on a desert island.
There is anything else you would like to share as one of your most memorable experience that you have during your career as a
Oh boy, there have been
professional?
so many. I got to spend about a week on the set of a movie called Under Suspicion, which unfortunately the movie didn't do well, but it starred Morgan Freeman and Gene Hackman. And I got to spend a week watching these two amazing men work together and interview them both. I've actually been lucky enough to interview Morgan more than any other person. I think I've sat down with him now 6 or 7 times. And I also got to spend a day on the set of Clint Eastwood's film Million Dollar Baby and watch Clint Eastwood work. And in my opinion, Clint Eastwood is one of the greatest filmmakers working today. He's a true American treasure. And it was an amazing lesson for me. When Morgan introduced me to Mr. Eastwood after they wrapped for the day, and it's a funny story. I said, I think I learned more in this one day than I did in 4 years at USC. And Mr. Eastwood looked at me with that squint and goes, "You should get your money back."
Well, I agree with you. I think that is some it's an American treasure that we have so far.
Oh
And
yeah.
I guess I would like to know a little bit more about you. Like, what are your favorite writers? Do you have your favorite screenwriters?
Favorite screenwriters? Sure. Well, Robert Towne, who wrote Chinatown, is certainly one of my favorites. The late William Goldman, who did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Marathon Man, who's also a great novelist. Preston Sturges, who did all those great screwball comedies in the 30s and 40s, was incredible. Gosh, there are so many. Paul Attanasio, who was the former film critic for the Washington Post, turned out to be an amazing screenwriter. His script for Quiz Show, which Robert Redford directed in the 90s, I think is one of the great screenplays ever written. Just many, many layers to it.
So by concluding this interview, I would like to ask you, you have been many years in the industry professionally. Do you feel, or do you feel that you need something else to learn? Like there is something that you haven't accomplished yet that you would like to get better on?
Yeah, I mean, when you stop learning, that means you're dead. You know, so yeah, I have so much to learn. We all do. I hope to direct one of my scripts in the near future. I've got one in particular that I want to direct, two actually, but one that I think would make a good first film because it's relatively simple. But yeah, I mean, part of our job while we're alive is, I think, to learn as much as we can. So yeah, it never stops.
Well, I have the pleasure to have the interview with you. Thank you for your time. It has been wonderful. I think that I have learned something too as well. And I hope that once this pandemic is over, we can have you back on the studio in Los Angeles.
It would be a pleasure. I'd love to.
Well, thank you so much. And then, so for all of you guys, there you go. You had to visit the website, thehollywoodinterview.com, because there are amazing interviews there, and you will have a wonderful time. So thank you, Alex. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.